Hello friend info, welcome back to Counsel and Might. This is going to be a video to explain my position relative to Dr. Ruckman. I'm doing this because I got a call from a good friend of mine, a Ruckmanite pastor, and I consider myself a Ruckmanite pastor. I don't use that qualification as a derogatory one, but basically saying, hey, like, you differ from Dr. Ruckman. I didn't expect this, with some certain qualms about this, and understandable. It was done in a really good spirit, and I appreciate the pastor for that. You have to give credit where credit is due. I disagree with the issues raised, but you have to appreciate. I can recognize a good spirit, and he's a good dear brother. But I realize this might be an issue for others. Now, in the circles I run in and I preach in, I have often is certainly an exaggeration, but a number of times I have said Dr. Ruckman is wrong here. And here's what I believe, and here's what I believe why. And I realize that sounds that can scare a pastor of a Ruckmanite church, and it can sound arrogant coming from a nobody like me, and I understand that. And this is not a video to go, oh, you guys worship a man, and, the Bible, Dr. Ruckman wasn't God, and, I can see new things in the Bible. And those are fair points, and I'll be making those points, but not in that spirit. A lot of those pastors are good men. They're just looking out for the spiritual stability of their church. And they kind of want to know, like, where are you exactly? Because, we thought you were, I suppose, follow Dr. Ruckman to a T doctrinally, but you don't. So what else is different about you? How do you look at this? And it seems that in some churches, that may have been perceived as my statement that, for example, Dr. Ruckman is wrong on this. It may have been perceived as a repudiation of everything that Dr. Ruckman taught. Now, it is not. I don't believe this. I appreciate Dr. Ruckman very much. He's been a great influence in my life. I think he was the main doctrinal influence in my life, and I thank God for this. When I preach in certain churches and I make those statements, it's never in Ruckmanite churches. I preach in Ruckmanite and non-Ruckmanite churches, but when I make those statements, it's never been an issue for me, ever. It has never been an issue at Hope Baptist Church, because the people know me and they know that I appreciate Dr. Ruckman. They hear me talk about other preachers that I very much disagree with, but I can still give credit where credit is due. They understand that me saying I differ on this doctrine is not a repudiation of everything that person not only taught doctrinally but stood for. It is not. And so in those circles, that's why they know where I stand. And so they understand that I have respect for Dr. Ruckman, and I believe a lot of the things that he believed. And they realize that, I just disagree with him on this particular issue or on that particular point. Now, in some churches, it's possible, and here's something that our kind of pastors, we face this issue when it comes to Dr. Ruckman, which is that the internet is very much against him, right? And a lot of people, the first time they hear about Dr. Ruckman, well, they go to Uncle Internet, Uncle Google, and then they type in Peter Ruckman, and they are flooded with some very controversial statements about him and supposed revelations and quotes out of context. And he was married thrice, and he believed in aliens with blue blood, and he was acerbic, he was acrimonious in debates. But the people that knew him personally, he could be very gentle, very tender, even if in his writings when you read them. But that's what they face, and that shakes the faith of young believers. And they're like, oh, you're like this, and pastors have to kind of explain, wait, there are fires that they have to put out, and saying, this is not a Steven Anderson. You don't know Peter Ruckman. You can't believe everything you're reading on the internet. He had a lot of enemies because he called them out mainly on the issue of the King James Bible, right? So I understand that in some churches that's an issue, and when I get up behind the pulpit and I make a statement like this, it can shake some people, and the pastor has to deal with this. So I understand that. I really do. I really, really do. I'm a pastor. I'm not just a YouTube guy. I'm a pastor, so I know the reality of dealing with those things, and that's why I'm appreciative of the quandary they may find themselves in. But I realize that if pastors that know me are asking me this question, how much more so on the internet? And for most of you, you probably don't even care either way. But let me say it. Let me state it. I love Dr. Ruckman. I think he was the main doctrinal influence in me. Reading his commentaries was transformed my Christian life. He wasn't the only influence. I spent 7 years in a Ruckmanite church. I'm 42 years old. So he wasn't the only influence, but he was a major one doctrinally. I learned how to believe my Bible because of him. Faith in the words of the King James Bible as given by inspiration of God activated each verse for me. When I believed each verse as being straight out of the mouth of God, it's like there was a light switch connected to that verse, and light switches were coming on. Taught me how to divide. It's his commentary that helped me come out of Calvinism. So I appreciate him very much. Let me say this, not only do I believe that Dr. Ruckman was one of the greatest Bible teachers doctrinally, I also believe he was a spiritual man of God in the way he lived and dealt with people. I believe that from a lot of my friends that knew him personally, the kind of impact he had on them. Yes, there's a whole bunch of PBI graduates that have a chip on their shoulders, but not all of them. Not all of them. In his writings, he's very gracious, and he could give credit where credit is due. Like this is a guy who could completely trample on a certain preacher about the King James Bible issue, and then turn around and tell you, by the way, if you want to know how to run your family, talk to him because he's an expert on this, right? I mean, that takes some grace and some humility to say this. So I appreciate him not only doctrinally, I appreciate his spirit. And I understand on some things he was acerbic, and some things I think he lacked the pastor's touch, but I understand where he came from. That being said, yes, there's some things I think he was wrong on. And here's the thing, is that it's a little ironic to be reproached for disagreeing with Dr. Ruckman when Dr. Ruckman himself made a name for himself by disagreeing with people who were an influence on his own life, and the others were saying, how dare you disagree with Bob Jones Sr.? How dare you disagree with John R. Rice? They're light years ahead of you. But Dr. Ruckman back then wasn't the Dr. Ruckman that we got to know. He was a relatively young preacher and teacher, and he was making very bold statements, and not just in relation to the King James Bible, but also doctrinal statements. The way he deals with people who disagree with him doctrinally on issues like the 4 beasts of Daniel, like the day of Christ, like teaching that Revelation 21:22 is the millennium, which is the correct teaching. He believes it's eternity. He chewed them out. I mean, this is a guy who said you have to stand on the shoulders of giants and move forward. This is a guy who said that God is not done showing revelations. That's a guy who became famous for that. And so to reprove someone who's walking in that very same spirit is ironic, because Dr. Ruckman was getting reproved like this. Now, granted, let me say this. There's a lot of wannabe Peter Ruckmans. And if you think that I'm one of them, you may be right. I mean, I am a man of flesh. And I'd be lying if I didn't tell you somewhere that I would think it would be very honorable to be the next Peter Ruckman. I don't believe I am. I think the Lord has given a lot more influence to better men than I am, with far greater ministries, who are Bible believers. But yeah, there is that problem. There's guys who just want to come up with something new for the sake of coming up with something new, so they can say that they found something new. And those guys are all over the place. They are all over the place. And I understand, again, as a pastor, that pastors can be leery of this. I think the way you establish yourself is if you have a good attitude towards Dr. Ruckman, and you have a good attitude towards the people that you disagree with, and you do take the time to show the pastors why you think you are right. And so far, the Lord has really blessed, and I've had excellent experiences with some of the biggest names you care to name in the King James Bible believing movement. And I've shown them why I disagree with Dr. Ruckman, and I've gotten really a lot of head nods. And so, because they know I love Dr. Ruckman, and I'm not trying to be a maverick for maverick's sake. So I just want to tell you that I'm trying to keep myself from, I'm trying to crucify my flesh from wanting to be the next Dr. Ruckman. I have no qualms in the eyes before the Lord standing up and saying, I think Dr. Ruckman was wrong on this. I don't think I'm better than him. I think the Lord uses us despite ourselves. I still think I'm learning. I think very much so that if I am building on Dr. Ruckman, as was witnessed of me by some big name preachers in some internet videos, if I am building on that, the day is coming where someone who will be relatively young to me will say, hey, listen, Pastor George, Dr. George Antonios, I believe that he was a good teacher and the Lord used him, but he was wrong on this. And here's what he missed. He had a certain bias here, and I think he's wrong on that. And here it is. That wouldn't be a repudiation of everything I stood for. I should like to think that I wouldn't think that. Hopefully, Lord, give me enough grace to be to do that. Now, some guys will be doing it this way, right? But you got to know the people. You have to know the people. That's where knowing the people personally comes in. So, for the record, let it be stated that I appreciate Dr. Ruckman very much. And I agree with a lot of what he says. I still recommend him to be read. That's all. But I disagree with him on some issues where I think he was wrong. Demonstrably wrong. And you can see some of those things. I'll look at my video about 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. About there's no rapture in 2 Thessalonians 2, something like this. And you can compare his interpretation of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, which has caused many Bible-believing, King James Bible-believing Christians to adopt, not caused them, but it has actually encouraged them when they saw his interpretation and even Dr. Stauffer's interpretation of adopting a post-wrath rapture of the church position. And my treatment of the text, which is far simpler, and you can see the comments, has caused a number of King James Bible believing, by the grace of God, Christians to pull away from the post-wrath and still assert the pre-tribulation rapture of the church. I think the fruit speaks for itself. I realize I'm nothing. I realize the Lord can show anybody anything he wants if we've got a believing heart, like Dr. Ruckman used to say, and a humble mind. So I love him. I appreciate him. I'm very thankful for him. When I say he's wrong, I should like to think that I can prove it scripturally and show why. The way you do this is you talk to pastors, temperate, knowledgeable pastors. Iron sharpeneth iron. When I get up and make statements like this, it's because in private conversations, I will have gone to pastors and tested out what I have seen. Right? When I began teaching that the judgment seat of Christ, for example, takes place on earth, not in heaven, I was down in Michigan at Pastor Chad Reese's church. Andrew Sluter was there, and we got to talking. And Chad Reese was telling me, I was telling him some relative novelties that I just saw in the Bible, and he says, you know what? Andrew Sluter has been saying the same thing. So I sat down with Andrew Sluter, and he had seen the same thing independently. He's a King James Bible believer. When I was telling Gene Kim about my way of approaching the general epistles, he said, hey, you know what? Chad Reese taught on this last year exactly like this. And there are novel things between me and Chad Reese and Andrew Sluter, but we've all come independently to the same conclusions. So we're vetting each other out. And that's one thing I'd like to do really in our circles. We are so independent that there's no peer review almost. Peer review is important. I think in the scientific community, it has a certain importance, and it should also amongst us. So I want to get peer reviewed. Absolutely. Before I make a statement, take it with a lot of gravity. The way I start is I am in line with Dr. Ruckman, and it takes me a very long time, as God is my witness, when I see some kind of hiccup before I move away from that position, because I respect the man. That man was unusual. The Lord showed him a lot of truth, and you don't disagree with him lightly, but you can. Now, there's guys here like, yeah, Dr. Ruckman is a sacred cow for a lot of people, and he is. In some churches, you disagree with Dr. Ruckman, you get run out. But they don't realize that they're doing the exact same thing that the John R. Rice churches were doing when people disagreed with John R. Rice. So we're perpetuating this. So, yes, for some people, anything that can still be discovered in the Bible has been discovered by Dr. Ruckman. Like, there's nothing beyond this. And if that's the case, that's a really sad day in my Christian life. That there's nothing for me anymore to mine out of my Bible. The guys who want to be mavericks and discover something new for something new's sake, notwithstanding. Who are occupied with diverse and strange doctrines. Right? That's a very sad thing. If I've lived a certain number of years, I should like to think that, hey, I have seen some things beyond what Dr. Ruckman has seen. And that's what he wanted. That's what he wanted. He wants someone to build on his work. We all build on each other's work. Bible revelation did not end with Peter S. Ruckman, as great as he was. It's very hard for us. We want the Pentecostal to see it the way we see it. We want the Calvinists to see the passage the way we see it, right? We want the amillennialists to see the passage the way we see it, and we tell them that they can't break out of the prism of their ecclesiastical tradition, and yet we are caught in the same prism. It's so hard for people to unread the text like Dr. Ruckman taught them to read the text. And there is a coherence in how he gave them to read the text. That's the difficult part. I was making that point. Where was I making that point? On another video, that you can have a good interpretation, not a bad one, a good interpretation, but it's not the better interpretation. And you can have a better interpretation, but it's not the best interpretation. So it's not necessarily a bad interpretation. Sometimes my disagreement is, this is not wrong in the sense of like heretical, but this is wrong in the sense of this is not the better way. This is not the best way. Nor do I want to be a guy who's just dedicated to destroying golden calves and sacred cows, because I think we become our own sacred cow in so doing. There's a danger in that. There's guys who are called to do that. That's fine. God bless them. I'm just saying I'm aware of the danger of being, I'm going to destroy sacred cows. Bless God, and you guys worship Dr. Ruckman and I don't because I'm more spiritual. That's another trap. That's another trap of condemning everybody. You can have a guy who believes everything Dr. Ruckman believes, and it's not because he worships Dr. Ruckman. I think he hasn't grown past Dr. Ruckman doctrinally, but it's not because he worships Dr. Ruckman necessarily. It could be, but not necessarily. So there's a whole spectrum. There's a whole shade. There's a whole range of shades in this, and it's unfair to people to just categorize them somewhere without knowing them. Thank God I have some great friends, Ruckmanites, that believe in the Lord, and sometimes they balk at some of the things I say, but they take into consideration. I really thank God for this. But for the record's sake, I love Dr. Ruckman, I appreciate Dr. Ruckman, and when I disagree with him, it is not a repudiation of what he said. Okay? So, always be careful of two extremes. Counsel might, that's the idea of balance. The extreme of everything Dr. Ruckman has said is right, but also the extreme of I'm not going to be like one of those guys, and so now I'm going to differ with Dr. Ruckman just for the sake of differing with Dr. Ruckman to show that I'm not an idol-worshipping Christian. Well, that's stupid too. That's foolish too. Yeah. Both extremes are foolish. Both extremes are foolish. So, that's where I stand. The things I disagree with him, I believe the judgment seat of Christ is on earth. I believe the millennial kingdom and I believe Revelation 21:22 are describing the millennial kingdom. I believe the day of Christ and the day of the Lord are one and the same thing. What else? I think he could have done a better job in Romans 9 in explaining why the story of Esau and Jacob is appealed to in the context of salvation. The dead who are judged in Revelation 11:18 that's not the second coming. Forgive me, that's not the great white throne judgment. That's at the second coming that they're judged. He's mistaken, in my opinion, to scale down the beasts in Daniel. I think the classical interpretation of the lion being Babylon, the bear being Persia, and the leopard being Grecia is the right interpretation. Daniel chapter 7, I believe what the scene there is not the great white throne judgment, but it is the judgment seat of Christ on the earth when the Lord Jesus Christ comes back. Are those major things? No. No, they're not major things. If you think they're major things, I'm sorry. They're you know, I hope you can still fellowship with me. And I love you, and I love Dr. Ruckman, and I love other guys who I disagree with even more than I do with Dr. Ruckman. We're all trying to do the best we can, and the Lord can use us despite ourselves. To figure out if someone is just some kind of attention-seeking novelist, or somebody who sincerely and studiously, prayerfully has been disagreeing with Dr. Ruckman, you're going to have to get to know them and watch the fruit and see their spirit over time. So I ask for your prayers to be the latter category and to be an example of that. It's a God have mercy. Be not many masters, for we shall receive the greater condemnation. So I know a lot of you guys agree on this stuff. God bless you. I know a lot of you guys would love to come on and discuss that very topic. I think I'm going to do that with one particular brother that I have in mind. It's time. Tomorrow, Lord willing, I'm going to try to get on and talk about the situation in Lebanon. I haven't yet opened my mouth because I've got family in Lebanon, and I've got to be very careful. Okay? But now it's possible maybe that I can come out there and make some public declarations about the situation there. Pray for Lebanon. Pray for peace with Israel. Please. God bless you guys. Have a great day.